Who the hell can wait till morning? Talk now at latenightsportsradio.com.
Ground control to Major Tom. Ground control.
Here on LateNightSportsRadio.com with Alex B. Smith and Bob Sullivan. R.I.P. David Bowie.
Yeah.
Alex, how you doing tonight?
Doing all right. Yeah, that was probably the worst news of the new year so far, without question. Losing a rock legend in David Bowie has really bummed me out to hear that. You know, he'd been sick for over a year and so forth, but he left the world with some fantastic music. But other than that, you know, doing well, getting ready for the divisional round of the NFL. We had a great game last night with Alabama and Clemson. Unless you laid the points like I did and a lot of other people, a lot of money changed hands with that last touchdown by the Clemson Tigers. But the Crimson Tide once again end up winning the game straight up, and they are the national champions of college football once again.
Do you? Well, my thing on David Bowie, one of the few people where, you know, you didn't. There was no bad things that you saw people tweeting about or.
Yeah.
You know, making fun of him or anything like that. It's pretty, pretty genuine disappointment that he died.
Yeah.
But you look at, the national championship last night. The question now has to be raised is, I kind of thought this going into it, but Nick Saban, you know, definitely the best coach of our era. But, you know, is he, you know, would you still go Bear Bryant? Would you put Paterno in that category? Where do you think right now Nick Saban ranks all time?
You know, college football has changed faces so many times throughout the course of just the last 30 to 40 years that it's so hard to try and make out a Mount Rushmore of college football coaches. We all try and do it, you know, but I mean, it's hard to compare Bear Bryant and Nick Saban, even, you know, obviously both their success mostly coming at the same school in Alabama, but times are just so much different, and the game has changed so much where, you know, it's hard. You know, like I said, yeah, of our generation, absolutely, Nick Saban's the top coach, but, you know, it's hard to, you know, spotlight one, you know, era of college football over the other as far as grading coaches, because everything's just so different. The amount of money that, you know, if Bear Bryant had the facilities and money that Nick Saban basically gets to play with and control with, you know, who knows what the hell those Bama teams back in the 60s and 70s would have been able to do. So it's apples and oranges, you know, but they're all fruit at the end of the day, you know.
I feel like the one person hurt by not having a national title most is Bill Snyder. And if he, you know, he got K-State to number one in the country at one point. You know, he's 193 and 100 at, or 101 or something like that at K-State. And that's one of the worst programs ever. Like, nobody's had success there other than him. And I think if, you know, in my opinion, he's definitely top 10, maybe I'd put him in the like top 7 category. But if he had a national championship, I'd definitely put him top 3, top 4. I think you just have to have at least a claimed national championship to your resume for that. But Saban, I would, you know, it's hard to not to argue with his results. I mean, you can say, oh, well, he gets all the best players to go to Alabama. Well, you also have to mold all that talent together into a team. And I don't think, you know, I mean, we'll take a look at Clemson. year in, year out, they have, all these amazing athletes that they put together. This is really the first year where they've really kind of put it all together into a national championship type run. And I mean, you look at Oklahoma has a lot of great athletes, Texas. I mean, you look
USC, Oregon.
Yeah, all these great programs. And Nick Saban's won 4 in 7 years. That's I don't care where you are. 4 in 7 years is 4 in 7 years, and so you got to give him credit there.
And especially in the SEC, that everybody for the most part calls, they say that this is the greatest conference in college football, and this is the greatest era in the history of their conference. Which, I mean, if there's no debate in that. They've won a national title 8 out of the last 10 years out of the SEC. So if the SEC is the premier conference of college football, then this is definitely the golden age of it, as they've basically dominated the national title scene for well over a decade.
Going into next year, I know you're not huge on futures, but is there anybody, I don't know if any numbers have been put out there, but have any numbers been, have you seen any numbers as far as, a potential long shot that you might like to place a futures on?
I did. It's funny. The Westgate out in Las Vegas, the Superbook, they've released their 2017 title odds. I was looking at them just for fun. I mean, it's incredibly too early to really look and place a wager down, in my opinion. I mean, I wouldn't be. I glanced at them. I wouldn't think about placing any kind of college football future of any sort until at least May. Wait for all the different transfers and coaching changes, and there's 2 million things to be sorted out for every program between now and even spring ball. But with that being said, one team that I really liked, and I know a lot of people talked about this last night, was Michigan. They're a 15-1 pick to win the national title. I think Jim Harbaugh, the work that he's done virtually overnight within a year has been tremendous, and they've got a lot of decent guys coming back. I think he's laid down the solid groundwork where I could see Michigan getting into the college football playoff next year. 15-1 is not the biggest value in the world, but when I looked at, Alabama opened up as a 6-1 favorite. They're the top. Oklahoma and Clemson 7-1 favorites. Ohio State not too far behind, 10-1. Notre Dame and Baylor at 12. Well, Baylor is 12-1. Notre Dame 15-1. So those are the top teams right there. So Michigan right in that mix, the 15-1 range. I think that would be the one thing I would look at playing if whenever I head back out to Vegas or whenever my local opens up these numbers. But not a whole lot of big long shots just yet. Got to wait for some transfer stuff, and like I said, a lot of different things to sort out between now and certainly before. I think we got 252 days before college football kicks off again.
I'd be intrigued by Michigan. There's rumors that they're going after, I don't know who it is, but they're going after potentially one of those graduate fifth-year seniors that they're looking at for a quarterback, which, honestly, I love that. The ability, that's such a, with the new rule where they have, obviously you just have to make up, some major that you want to go after at another school. Right. They'll find it, or a master's program. But I like that new rule where basically a gun for hire. Florida State did it with Everett Golston. I mean, it didn't work out, 100% in their favor, but they had a better year than I think they would have with a brand new quarterback. And it would, I think it's going to be interesting. These, freak athletes that are quarterbacks that don't really have a Braxton Miller who might, it would have been interesting if he would have gone and found another program. I mean, that was the rumor all year.
Yeah.
But yeah, I always hope that, it just makes things more interesting with the freak athlete quarterback that, can go find another school. And that's becoming a new thing.
A big transfer that I heard about recently is, you get Barry Sanders Jr. He's going to apparently leave Stanford, and he might be going to his dad's alma mater, Oklahoma State. Looking at these numbers, Stanford's a 20-1 favorite to win next year, where Oklahoma State's 40-1. So you look at how great of a season Oklahoma State had this past year. If they had somebody, Barry Sanders, his son, he's not like his dad, but he's a very talented running back, but he's going to be overshadowed all of next year if he stays in Stanford, obviously with Christian McCaffrey returning. So that would be a huge boost for Oklahoma State, who didn't have the best running game this past year. They were a very pass heavy offense. So to add someone of his caliber and talent could be something to look at. That number, I'm sure, will move. You'll lose some value there, and that might turn into a 30-1 or 25-1 shot with the addition of Sanders Jr. if he does decide to go down to Stillwater.
Do you think who do you think's the front runner? If Saban's going to leave for the NFL, who do you think the front runner is to get him?
I really don't think he's going to leave. And everybody's talking about this today. I really think Nick Saban's a lot like, although the report that leaked out today but was shut down recently, that was shut down by John Calipari with Kentucky about, if he were to leave, some NBA team would have to offer him 10 years at $120 million. Which I'm sure if that were the case, then maybe he would at least consider it. But I really don't think these guys are going to jump into the NFL. I don't see Saban trying to go back into the NFL. He failed miserably when he was with the Miami Dolphins, and it wasn't, and people say, okay, well, he wasn't ready. It's like, no, this guy was already a proven national champion coach in college football with LSU. All right, he had done some wonders with the Michigan State program before that. That was his first, highlight coaching gig. So it's just, we talked about this before. We talked about it a couple of times. Just some coaches are just made to be college coaches, and some are made to be pro coaches. And it's not a knock on coaches if they can't make it to the NFL. It's not like players. If a player is great in college and doesn't make it to the pros, then yeah, it's obviously okay. They're that one level away, but it takes certain things to be a college coach that it does to be, that doesn't necessarily take to be an NFL coach. I don't think Bill Belichick would be a great college football coach at all, in my opinion. Obviously, from a football mind perspective, X's and O's, he's brilliant, but I couldn't see him handling the whole, kids with the classes and the 20-hour, practice limits and things like that. I think those things would be a hindrance to a guy like Belichick. Belichick needs to have his players, his personnel, everything needs to be a professionally run, top flight organization where a guy like Saban or a guy like Steve Spurrier, they can work with the recruiting, aspects and work around some of the nuances that the NFL doesn't have to deal with.
In looking into the playoffs this week in the NFL, what did you think, what caught your eye in particular with these games?
Well, I mean, just short of recapping last week, the two games that I was on big, both won. And, we talked about it on here about how I just said, two teams had to win the two worst divisions this year in Houston Texans and the Washington Redskins. But I didn't think they were ready to play in the postseason. And they pretty much proved me right. I mean, Houston was god awful from the opening kickoff all the way through. Redskins had a great first quarter, and then they just disappeared in the second and never came back out of the tunnel, basically. So it was nice to cash both of those winners on what was a pretty good weekend overall. But looking into this week now, lots of injury issues all over the place. They just announced with Green Bay that Devontae Adams might not be ready for Saturday's game as they head to Glendale to take on the Arizona Cardinals. That's going to be a very, very tough blow for Aaron Rodgers and that offense if they lose basically who's the 1B receiver in that group now. We've seen that Randall Cobb cannot handle all the pressure on his own, but he's gonna have to take that role and the tight end Richard Rodgers and Ty Montgomery, a couple of guys are gonna have to really step up now if Adams can't go in that game. It's gonna be a really tough spot. You look at Pittsburgh. Obviously, there's not a line was up at Denver -7. It's been pulled off from a couple of books because of the whole issue with not only Ben Roethlisberger, apparently with torn ligaments in his shoulder, but now you have Antonio Brown questionable. They said he's not looking good to be ready for Sunday after taking that dirty hit late in the Cincinnati game from Burfict. So those are two spots that you got to really look at. Let's see. You got to really wait maybe a couple more days to make a judgment and put some money down, but those are going to be two really tough things to overcome for the Packers and the Steelers.
Looking at the Steelers, I felt going into the weekend, after we talked, and then I went to the bar. I was just listening to some people talk, and they were talking about, God knows what. But what I was starting to be convinced about was I thought we were heading towards a Steelers Seahawks rematch in the Super Bowl from 10 years ago or whatever it was. But that's what I felt going into this year or going into the playoffs. Looking at Pittsburgh, it depends on what Peyton Manning shows up for the. If the Broncos have kind of a, okay, we're going to go with Peyton Manning, and then they're undecided. Peyton starts struggling and goes to Osweiler. If it's a back and forth with those two,
Yep,
that's going to be a problem. And
I agree.
the Steelers' defense isn't, amazing this year, but it's been good enough. And looking at their offense, Roethlisberger, yes, he is banged up. He's got a bad shoulder, but I feel like they're at their best in the playoffs with Roethlisberger when he's not asked to do that much.
Right.
However, without, who knows what D'Angelo Williams is going to be. They don't have Le'Veon Bell, but, I like Tomlin. I think Tomlin's a better coach than Kubiak, and the Broncos haven't really proven anything to me in their run, with Peyton Manning, and Kubiak hasn't proved anything in big games in his career either as a coach. So I kind of like Pittsburgh in the spot. I'm not 100% confident they're going to the Super Bowl like I was going into last week or this weekend, but I kind of feel like there's a chance that the Broncos mess this up.
And that was the thing when I was saying this when right before the Broncos announced officially that Peyton Manning would be starting in this game, and I think I mentioned it here for sure that I was worried that this would happen when Manning came out and brought Denver back in that final game of the regular season. We know Peyton Manning's talent level, and we know his drive. That if he would play with half of his body missing if he could, and so that's not the issue at hand. But the issue at hand is exactly what you said. If for some reason, he starts to falter early, and you have to go back to Brock Osweiler. Well, where is Brock Osweiler's mind? This guy was sitting waiting in the wings for years, and now he finally gets his chance and proves his talent worth. But he finally gets benched. And, after having one rough outing, will he be mentally prepared? Would he have been mentally prepared to start this game anyway, being at his first career playoff start in a very high profile, high performance spot? But now we have to question even more, will he be ready to jump into this spot off the bench should his team be down? I'm not really comfortable enough to figure that out by especially laying nearly a touchdown. So it's a game I'm definitely gonna have to pass. I mean, Pittsburgh, I can't back Pittsburgh even if you gave me 10 points with the Steelers right now. I'm not gonna back a spot where it might be Landry Jones and you're gonna be down Antonio. Bryant. You're gonna have Martavis Bryant. As your number one receiver. Granted, he's a good receiver, but that's not a combination I'm gonna back on as a road dog, even at double digits. So definitely a game I'm not gonna be betting on by any means, but it should be an interesting game to watch.
I think this is going to be a matter of does Kubiak panic and make a rash decision,
right,
and throw Osweiler into a bad situation. If I think Peyton Manning, you can, maybe he makes a couple mistakes here and there, but it's a matter of if Kubiak, riding the waves of the game with. I think you're better off riding the waves of the game with Peyton Manning right now than panicking and then throwing Osweiler back into the fire. I think I think this is all about Kubiak, really.
It is, but you have to now because of the way that this was handled. Like I said, even if they had waited until this week to name a starter, I think that would have been a little bit better for the confidence of Brock Osweiler and just the overall team morale of you go in saying, hey, we've got two fully capable quarterbacks who are ready to play in this playoff game, rather than saying, all right, well, Osweiler's done and now Peyton Manning's back, so now it's the Peyton Manning show again until it's not. I think it puts a lot of pressure on even Manning, but I think it put way more pressure, like you said, on Kubiak and an enormous amount of pressure that didn't have to be placed on Brock Osweiler should he have to come into this ballgame.
Looking at I think the team that's most affected by having a bye is Carolina. I feel like this team. I feel like they needed to play. Whoever it may have been, they needed. I felt like they needed to play. Yes, they're record-wise, they're the best team in the NFL. They've been, they know how to win. It's just I feel like that week off is going to most affect them as a team of the 4 teams that got to bye. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. And, we look back at, some of the teams that have gone 15-1 in history. The last 4 were the 98 Vikings, who notoriously, went all the way to the overtime of the, the NFC title game, losing in overtime. Then you look at the 2004 Pittsburgh Steelers, went 15-1, won another playoff game, and then lost in the conference title game. But the team that really stuck out in my mind was the 2011 Green Bay Packers, and that's they almost went into the same pattern of this Panther team. Panthers went 14-0 and then lost the Atlanta game, then came back to win. The Packers, they lost within, I think it was the first or second week of December before finishing 15-1, have the home game against the New York Giants, and they lose. And it was evident that they needed that momentum. And so that worries me with this Carolina team. I could see where, I feel like they needed momentum going in, and now you're playing a dangerous Seahawk team that should not be here now. I mean, that's the thing. We talked about how bad they were during the regular season. They fought through and won a wild card berth. They should have lost the game last week to Minnesota. They got lucky, but they're a good team. That's always a dangerous spot. Whenever you have a good team that's getting lucky, now they have a chance. They're not going to be dealing with freezing cold weather in Carolina. They're going to be ready. And these two teams met last year in the postseason and played a close game, and Seattle fought it out. So I think it is a tough spot for the Panthers, and Seattle is drawing heavy money, sharp money so far. You can tell in the number movement. This line opened at 3. We're seeing a lot of 2.5s. And Carolina, I'm seeing a lot of some spots you can lay plus money to take Carolina. So that shows you that Seahawks are drawing early sharp money, and we'll see a lot of two-way action, I think, in this before that kickoff on Sunday. But it's going to be a tough spot. I think in talking about the bye week, I think the team that had helped out the most, and we mentioned this last week, was the New England Patriots. All the different injuries that they had to deal with and so forth. It's going to be interesting to see how they come out and respond, and Kansas City having a head full of steam and momentum after that big win against Houston, finally getting the monkey off their back of winning a playoff game for the first time, since the Joe Montana year in '94. So I think it's going to be the top game to watch this week, and I think that's going to be a really highly contested ball game. I was saying this week, I think I really thought the winner of Seattle Carolina would be the team to reach the Super Bowl of the NFC, and I still kind of feel that way. But I think even more now, I think Kansas City, New England, I think whoever wins between that game, not only do they represent the AFC in the Super Bowl, I think they might be the odds-on favorite to win the Super Bowl.
Yeah. Well, on that note, we're going to go ahead and take a little break here on the box seats with Alex B. Smith and Bob Sullivan. When we come back, we'll break down each playoff game, each divisional game this week, and place or make our bets on who's going to win here on LateNightSportsRadio.com.
Who the hell can wait till morning? Talk now at latenightsportsradio.com.
Welcome back to the Box Seats here on latenightsportsradio.com. News came out today that the Chargers and Rams will be heading to LA. Raiders are going to be staying in Oakland. Alex, what do you make of this news today?
You know, this whole scenario has been just very, very weird. You know, it started off with obviously the Raiders want to have money to rebuild, their stadium, which has been an absolute disaster, not just for the Raiders organization, but the Oakland A's as well. I mean, they've had to deal with, playing in a stadium that's way too big to be holding a baseball game. And there's a lot of renovations that need to be done. The famous photos that came through in Deadspin of the different sewage backups that happened during rainstorms over the course of a baseball season in the last couple of years. So, that's a bad situation to have for any, facility, obviously. But it started with Oakland wanting money to, rebuild and get a new stadium. And then the county and city shut them down. Alameda County, notorious for not wanting to spend money on a lot of different things. So then it led into where the San Diego Chargers want out of San Diego. If they can't get a new stadium, San Diego County doesn't have a lot of money that they want to spend because they've spent most of their money that they allocated into Petco Park, which isn't built big enough to hold a football team. And then you have Sam Kroenke with the St. Louis Rams just basically giving the big middle finger and saying he wants out of St. Louis when the St. Louis, the city of St. Louis County, and Missouri, the state, owe almost $112 million, $115 million out of the $250 million that was spent on the Edward Jones Dome back in 1995. So in 21 years, you have a state and city that were, for one reason or another, unwilling to pay their bills and pay off a stadium that was supposed to host all sorts of events and has hosted all sorts of events to bring money to the area. And so all of this business talk, what it means as far as football goes, not to bore anybody, but the fact of the matter is this. You obviously don't want to disappoint a really big fan base with San Diego having such access to still being in the Southern California area. The original plan was Oakland and San Diego to move to Carson, California, because that would draw enough of the Orange County, LA County, and even San Diego County areas into that fan base, and really wouldn't be alienating San Diego so much now as this move where the Rams get to build a stadium in Inglewood, and they either can decide to have split ownership of the stadium with the Chargers, or the Rams don't own it and have the Chargers be a tenant for a couple of years before the Chargers decide to build their own stadium. The other issue with it is the Inglewood project wouldn't be ready officially until maybe 2018, possibly 2019. So the Chargers would have to possibly play at LA County Stadium, and split it with USC. USC has a clause in their contract saying that there can't be two teams there, otherwise they'd have to get extra money. So it's become a real mess, and it won't be sorted out anytime soon. We just know that the two teams that are looking to go there, that was voted by the owners today.
I don't, LA, it's a weird market where, they can, yes, they have the people and the resources to monetarily support an NFL franchise, but will the people go is the question. And I know it's Sunday, but even when the Dodgers are good, the only team that, really draws on a consistent basis, you could say, is pretty much the Lakers, whether they're good or bad.
Yeah, the Lakers and the Kings. Yeah.
Yeah, and you look at that, and it's like, I can't, I didn't understand why they didn't just say, okay, let's try one, and then if we need to add, if they can handle one, then we'll bring in two or three. But I think this is the wrong move, bringing in two at the same time. I think this is, at least the Rams, still have, whether it be like Adam Carolla, there's still a fan base there for Rams fans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
not so much like the Chargers. They couldn't draw in San Diego. I don't see them being a big draw in LA either.
I agree. And the thing with it is, I think ESPN aired a piece. I want to say this was around August or September, and they had a couple of their internet correspondents go hang out in the California area. I think they were in Venice Beach and a couple of places, and they were interviewing people. Some of them were old Rams fans, some of them were Raiders fans or Chargers fans or what have you, and they asked them about, would they go? Like I said, would they go to the games? And a lot of people said no. I mean, they were talking about, the notorious LA traffic, and now with this team being in Inglewood, most people would be traveling on the 405, which even if you haven't been in the Southern California area, you've more than likely heard about the dreaded 405 traffic that lasts 3-4 hours and is a headache no matter what time of the year it is. So when you add in all these other factors and the fact that we've seen LA, they haven't struggled in the last 2 decades without the Rams and Raiders. You know what I mean? So like I said, there's other things there that and there are other teams there, and the fact that we've seen big market, the big teams like the Dodgers spend a ton of money and not have people come to the games and or different issues and what have you. I think it is tough, and I agree with you that there should have only been one team to move to LA. And then we can see before you have the second or third. Like I said, I don't think the Rams thing was really in a planned out thing as far as the NFL was concerned. Like I said, it seemed like Stan Kroenke was just, had his own issues with St. Louis and took it upon himself to make a deal, initially with the Chargers, because he talked to the Chargers, and even today, there needed to be 24-32 votes to get any move done today. The two proposals were either the Chargers and Oakland Raiders split time at a stadium, or the Chargers and Rams. Both of them came fairly short within the initial vote, and so it was Kroenke and John Spanos, the Chargers owner, who talked in between the morning session and decided to get things rolling on their move, which eventually got an overwhelming 30-2 vote this evening. So, like I said, there's a whole lot of logistics and kinks to work out. But I do think this will be, a disastrous move as far as the Chargers go. I really don't see why they're leaving San Diego other than the fact that they just, the unwillingness to spend money to build a new stadium. But, cities have to realize that, these teams need to keep up and renovate these buildings. You can't have a team play in an old building. It hurts the entire franchise. The building gets old, and then players don't want to go there. Fans don't want to go there. Then what's the point of having a team at all? So you have to keep up with these things. And, it's just like any other kind of facility in any other sort of business.
Well, I think, the thing you said about the Edward Jones Dome in St. Louis, it's like, I've been there, it's not nice, but you look at, there's a lot of these, I don't think Giant Stadium was fully paid off when they knocked that thing down. Like, these stadiums, they're not cheap, and it's a lot of taxpayer money, and I remember seeing the story on Olbermann when he was on ESPN2, and I don't think he was the originator of the story, but the story was if, it was, obviously they need to keep those there. However, if it was, such a great business, such a great investment, the owners would pay for it themselves, or
right.
they would get the funding necessary themselves instead of relying on taxpayers to pay off, a stadium that won't be paid off in somebody's lifetime. Like, I think Giant Stadium was open for 37 plus years, and it was never paid off, and they're still paying money on it. But, they need to build nicer stadiums, but I can't really argue with the politicians when they're like, okay, well, yes, we want a team here, but this is, we're going to upgrade this district, but we're going to be paying off. We're going to be in the hole for the next 37 years trying to pay this off. There's no financial sense in it from a politician's side.
Yeah, and exactly. And if you look now at the landscape of, let's say in our lifetime, so in 25 to 30 years, you've had so many franchises. Obviously, you've had a big boom and expansion in all four major sports, but you've had a lot of established franchises, and I'm saying most notably in hockey and now in football, that have uprooted from a city after 20, 30, even almost 40 years, and now go to another city. We saw most of that movement happened in the early and mid 90s. And so now you look and see, is that do franchises now have the mentality of once they see these teams move, do they plan to stay in a city permanently anymore? You know what I mean? Like, I mean, who would have? I never would have thought in my lifetime that the Rams, at once leaving LA, now going to St. Louis, would ever leave the St. Louis area. Like, what's the point of getting a franchise if you're only going to have them for 30 years? And like you said, even more so when in 30 to maybe even 40 years, the stadium you build for them won't even be paid off. It doesn't make sense to me from any business standpoint whatsoever. It's not a pump and dump or get rich quick scheme by any means of having a team in a town for 20 years, because like you said, ultimately somebody ends up footing the bill for the stadium, and it's not even always just taxpayer money, but the city loses money too, because and things around it. If you have a team somewhere for 20 years and they leave, people don't understand that the economic downfall on the local bars and restaurants and businesses and team shops and things of that nature, it falls all over everybody. So it doesn't. A lot of it's not making sense, and there's no visible advantage point from any angle when you look at it.
Well, that was kind of an argument here in Omaha about 5 or 6 years ago when Omaha hosted the College World Series for the last 60 years.
Mm-hmm.
They built a baseball stadium strictly for, nothing happens there other than maybe a couple concerts and then 2 weeks of the College World Series. So there's a baseball stadium here. Actually, now there's two baseball stadiums, one for the Omaha Storm Chasers, but people were complaining, well, why do we have to build a new stadium for an event that's only 2 weeks long? And it's like, well, also look at the fact that there's NFL stadiums that are only used like 8 times a year,
right?
8 to 10 times a year. So, I mean, it's basically, we built basically to support kind of an NFL franchise. It was the NFL mentality of building a stadium, but you have to build it to keep the team, and I get it just kind of keeps the, I guess, morale around the city a little bit better to have stuff to do, and keep things.
And one more thing before we change on that, and that's a really good point what you brought up, is that I think the death blow to a lot of these cities and a lot of these stadiums, and I think the San Diego is obviously a big example, but you could even say Pittsburgh's another, and even Cincinnati. But if you think about it, in the 70s and 80s, you had all these teams that split their stadium with the baseball stadium, Three River Stadium and Riverfront, and with the Jack Murphy County Stadium. And when all these baseball teams decided we need to go smaller, we need to have more intimate ballparks, more baseball specific ballparks, that drove out all the football stadiums. And other than having different football events like bowl games, or maybe with the boom and expansion of soccer lately, there's only, like I said, there's only so many things you can really do in a football only stadium, where if you have a stadium that's football and baseball combined, it takes up a lot of time. Oakland County, for what it's worth, their their event book is filled year round, because they either have football and then they go right into baseball, and then vice versa. It's a circle. So I think that hurt a lot of different cities, and that's why we're having some of these examples now where, what do we do with the stadium space? Like that, we're not going to be able to pay it off because we don't have any other events.
Mm-hmm. Well, getting into the divisional round for the NFL, let's break down some of these lines. What did you think of right now? Looks like New England's at 5-point favorite against Kansas City. Total at 42.5, 42 in some books. What do you think of this line right now?
Yeah, it's an interesting opening for the total, in my opinion. You looked at, it opened around 45.5, and we've seen some money come in now, drop that down to, was it 43? Now I've seen it's at 42, and I've actually seen a lot of 42s offshore. And obviously that makes sense. You look at Kansas City, that they were able to shut down Houston last week. Granted, they were playing, Brian Hoyer. This week they're playing Tom Brady. And while he's not 100% Tom Brady, I still think a 75%, 80% Tom Brady is still good than probably 110% Brian Hoyer based on how Hoyer played last week. So definitely a step up in class for Casey's defense against New England. But New England has a boatload of injuries, like you said, not just with Brady, but the offensive line. Most of his receiving targets are hurt. How healthy will they be with this bye week and coming back? So I really think this total could have opened up a lot higher, in my opinion. I expect it to be around 47 or 48 range, because these two teams can score, back and forth on each other. I don't think Kansas City defense is the most dominant in the NFL, but they are really good, and they have great special teams. We saw them open up the game last week with a kickoff return for a touchdown. They forced a bunch of turnovers. They have the ability, they have the intangibles on defense, special teams to score points and score touchdowns, more notably. So I think 42 is a bit low, and if this number drops anymore, I'm definitely going to be on the over in that game.
Where would you lean as far as, would you lean towards Kansas City covering, or would you?
Yeah, I would look at maybe taking the points with Kansas City, and if the number keeps dropping, maybe look at playing New England on the money line. I think New England wins this game, but I could see New England win. I could see this game being a 30-27 final with New England, maybe kicking a field goal and getting out of there with a close win. But 5 points, 5.5 points is kind of, if it goes up towards 6, I would definitely lean at taking the points with the Chiefs. But I think it might be a good spot here where you can play, get 5.5 now at Kansas City, and should some sharp money come in and move the Chiefs down, you'll be able to catch New England as a money line price lower than 150, and hope for a 2-3 point win.
I mean, this one I kind of like Kansas City in this one. I'm almost leaning towards taking a money line Kansas City. Obviously Brady is a lot better than Hoyer, but a shutout in the playoffs is a shutout in the playoffs, and that can, brings a lot of confidence to a defense.
Right.
And, I don't think it's going to go. I think this is definitely going to be a close game, but I'm leaning towards taking a Kansas City money line. I don't think I'm going to do it, but if I were to do something, it would probably be that.
And that's the thing. Like I said earlier, I really feel like these are the two best teams in the AFC, and easily the two best teams. Obviously, we're getting down to truly seeing who the best teams in the league are. But I think these two teams, I think the winner of this game has enough momentum and enough strength to pretty much be able to win out the next two games and hoist the Vince Lombardi trophy. So I'll be watching this game super closely, because I might be placing a futures bet on the winner of this game going in and as a Super Bowl champion.
Yeah, Kansas City and Seattle, two hottest teams right now.
Yeah.
In the playoffs. On the other side, in the AFC, Denver favored by 6.5. Seen some 6s. Total of 39.5. I do like that total going under. But what do you like here, or do you like anything here?
Like I said, there's nothing here that I like. There's too many injury concerns, too many emotional intangibles. Like you said, with the Denver, the quarterback issue. Obviously, they're downplaying and saying it's not a quarterback controversy, not an issue, but it is. It is because of the two quarterbacks that we're talking about and the history and experience that they have. So it's not a quarterback controversy of they're fighting back and forth for the spot, but it's a controversy of who's ready and who's not, who's really capable of carrying the load here. And for Pittsburgh, like I said, there's just an overwhelming amount of injuries on offense where looking at the total. And it's 39 in the books that have it up. A lot of big books have pulled this game down. They're going to put this number back up on Thursday, I'm sure. I can see where this number is going to get hammered early. So if you see it 39 or 40 and you like the under, play it quickly, because I can see where this total is definitely going to drop. I haven't really checked the weather out in Denver. I know there's been a lot of bad area within the region, though. So if weather plays a factor of this, a lot of snow or heavy wind, that under is going to get hit hard. But this is the game I definitely will be passing. Like I said, this is if unless you find something creative or exotic, this is which is this week. Not a whole lot of glaring side or total plays, but you might be able to find some teaser spots. Like you said, momentum is going to be a big factor in this Pittsburgh Denver game. This might be a game if you have access to live wagering. Kind of focus on things. If you see some swings, momentum swings preparing to change, you can find some cash opportunities in that form.
I find it interesting in the AFC. We have, of the 4 quarterbacks left, we have Brady, Manning, and Roethlisberger, and we're like, And it's because Brady's kind of dinged up, Roethlisberger's dinged up, and Peyton's dinged up. Well, Peyton's at the end of his ropes, but you look at 3 years ago, we've been like, holy crap, this is like the golden age for quarterback matchups in the AFC. We could get a Brady Roethlisberger AFC title or Brady Manning again, and it's not looking that enticing to get a Brady Manning 7 or something in the AFC title game. It's just odd to me this year. But yeah, I'm going to stay away from this game altogether. I do, if I were to bet, it would probably be the under, just because of the way Denver's defense is, and with all the injuries in this game, I'd lean towards the under in the Denver-Pittsburgh matchup. In the NFC, looking at Carolina, Seattle, Carolina getting 3 against Seattle, total of 44. What do you like here? What do you not like here?
Like I said, it's a tough spot for Carolina. We both felt that they were a team that strived on having that momentum of winning week in and week out. But at the same time, it's never really a bad idea, especially in the NFL, to have a week of rest to heal up players who are hurt. Greg Olsen was one of the players who had been dealing with some injuries. Stewart was another player, a running back, who had been playing through some injuries and so forth. So those guys getting some rest helps with their offense. But at the same time, you look at Seattle coming in with momentum, a veteran team, a experienced playoff team, a team, we've seen these guys 2 years in a row go to a Super Bowl, win a Super Bowl title, escape with a narrow victory. I feel like they have the momentum shift and the momentum swing. The fact that they're playing in better weather conditions, I think there's a lot of things that side with Seattle here. But this is going to be Carolina's biggest game, obviously, of the entire year. And they have the talent, they have the defense to shut down Russell Wilson. Something that a lot of teams have not been able to do in the last 8 weeks. In Minnesota, I guess, did a decent job of it in the first half, but Wilson looked good even in the frigid cold up here in that second half of that ball game. So, Wilson's playing, very solid football right now. Their offense is clicking. Doug Baldwin's looking sharp again. So we'll see how good this Carolina defense is, and can Cam Newton, find a way to penetrate through this Seattle defense. This is going to be a tight game. The number's right at 3. I don't think we're going to see any crazy movement to where Seattle get a bunch of points or Carolina, drops down and this game goes toward a pick 'em. So no favorite here in the spot side or a total, to be honest. The total, I think, is a good number, 244. It could easily fall to one side or the other. One big touchdown could swing the momentum of that total.
Looking at this, I'm not a big fan really of anything here. I don't, Carolina beating them earlier in the year, kind of, not having a lot of momentum going into this one. Seattle's been playing great. They definitely should have lost last week, but, survive and advance in the playoffs.
Yep.
And, Russell Wilson, I think, the weather's going to be better than what it was in Minnesota, and way better than what it was. And I think that's well for him. It's just a matter of whether Seattle's, front seven can handle Cam Newton, just getting pounded time and time again, whether they'll break. And I don't really like anything points-wise here or total-wise, but I would if I had to lean one way, it would probably be towards Seattle winning this game. Looking at Arizona, Green Bay, Arizona favored by 7, total of 50. What do your numbers say on this?
This spread's a tad bit too high for me, in my opinion, to lay the points with the Arizona Cardinals. Early numbers had indicated this game was going to open up around the 4.5, 5-point favorite for Arizona. That's where my numbers lead. I think Arizona's 4 points better than Green Bay, even despite how the Packers laid an egg, in Glendale, just less than a month ago. I don't think we're going to see a repeat of that by any means. I think this Packer team, obviously, getting the momentum from playing well in the last 3 quarters against Washington. Another week for these guys to get a little healthier. But like I said, the biggest glaring issue with the Packers is Davante Adams not being ready to go. That definitely hurts what's already been an ailing and struggling offense for the most part. So it's, with a healthy Davante Adams and a healthier offensive line, I would definitely be all over the Packers in the points here. But like I said, I think Arizona sneaks out and wins this game. But asking them to cover, over 7.5 in this spot is going to be pretty tough. I mean, Carson Palmer, as great of his years he's had, this guy's never won a playoff game before. So, how big, can he come through and step up in this ball game? Like I said, all 4 of these games, the numbers are very tight, which obviously you expect the last weeks of the NFL season. And this is the 2 examples. One, I always say, you don't bet if you don't have to. There's no reason to bet any of these 4 games. They're going to be fun to watch from a fan perspective, but if there's no value here, don't worry about, taking a week off. If there will be other games, there are other sports going on, so there's no reason to rush and bet any of these games. But like I said, for those who have the access and availability to betting live wagering and betting teasers, first and second halves and so forth, this is a good weekend for some of those exotic wagers and plays because, you can, put a 6-point teaser on, Green Bay and Seattle and get those extra points or tease Arizona and New England down if you feel those are to the right side. So I encourage people to do their homework and be able, and go out and whatever sides they feels right, make some of those kind of correlated moves and plays. And if you feel so inclined to wager on any of these games this weekend. But for me, there's nothing that's really glaring and stand out enough. And, like I said, other than that New England Kansas City total, it's a good possibility I might not play anything for these games this weekend.
Is there any bad advice that you've seen given out on Twitter or internet?
Well, there's a lot of people in my and I'm not trying to obviously bash the industry that I'm in, but you have a lot of people in the handicapping business that want to sell plays for the sake of selling plays, and they'll go, okay, I got a pick on all 4 games this week, and that might be true, but I highly doubt it. Don't rush to somebody who says they've got an opinion on every side and every total this week or next week. That could be the case, but rarely, more often than not, you see somebody that's touting that, especially with the situations that we've pointed out this week. Odds are they're just trying to get your money, and it's an unfortunate caveat of the business. There are some people who, it's kind of a lot like car salesmen. Some of them are really just trying to get in your pockets, and some of them are just trying to be, genuine about it. Like I said, I'm not going to tell you or anybody to bet a game if I don't have a comfortable feel to it. So you will see a lot of that for people following on Twitter, and you see different websites or whatever, and like I said, there will be, we're going to have 3 more major football games after this weekend. There's a lot of great college basketball going on. There's great hockey. There's NBA. There's other things where you can find some value to bet on. You want to have some fun and chuck a few dollars down on something, that's fine. But as far as the big investment wager, don't force anything this time of year just because it's the final games of the season.
Mm-hmm. Well, before we get out of here, any last second advice for any bettors this weekend?
Like that's about it. Like I said, just do your homework, and don't feel compelled to bet games this weekend. I say that no matter what. I mean, it could be, the largest cards. There were a lot of cards that I skipped in the NFL during the regular season. So, even with a limited slate of games in any sport, don't force any wagers. Just do your homework and follow your notes and your gut and what feels right, and make a calculated investment. And even scaling down your bet size. So, if you normally bet $100 a game, scale it down to 25 or 50 this week for a game if you don't feel of the utmost comfort by it. That's the biggest advice I can give to anybody. I don't, like I said, I don't have a play on this. I'm mostly focused on basketball and hockey now, unless something really sticks out. But that's the best advice I think I can give anybody right now is, don't rush to the window with any ideas.
Well, Alex, before we get out of here, do you want to tell everybody where we can find you on Twitter, the internets, all the stuff you got going on right now?
Yeah, follow me on Twitter at AXSmithSports. I've got a sale going on exclusively at AXSmithSports.com. You can get all of my plays from now until the end of June, so that covers Super Bowl, March Madness, all of hockey throughout the playoffs, all the any NBA, college basketball I have. All of it for just $699, so that's half off the full season price at the beginning of the year. You can get that only at AXSmithSports.com, but I'm also at SportsMemo.com, Kelly in Vegas, and VegasInsider.com if you want to get my daily plays. Packages are better purchased at my main site, AXSmithSports.com.
All right. Well, and that'll do it this week for the box seats with Alex B. Smith and Bob Sullivan here on LateNightSportsRadio.com. You can catch the Hold 1005 podcast coming up next here on LateNightSportsRadio.com. And come visit us next week on Tuesday to discuss the championship weekend. Good night.